Hi, I'm going to answer Leah's question. And in the first part of her question, she discusses the Iraq War a little bit, and then she asks, where do we draw the line for the need for humanitarian intervention? What makes individuals think that we should not have gotten involved? And would the response be different if the war in Iraq had proceeded differently? How should politicians decide what equates a need for humanitarian intervention? In other words, how bad does a ruler need to be for the U.S. to make an ethical choice to get involved and implement regime change or get troops involved? So throughout Chapter 20, the author Alex J. Bellamy kind of talks about the different systems that are in place to address humanitarian intervention and what happens when there are human rights atrocities, and how to balance that with also maintaining sovereignty of other nations. So I think to sum it up, on 297 he says that there's a broad consensus that there are circumstances in which the use of force for military purposes might be justified, but critics argue that humanitarian intervention is legitimate only as a last resort, in the very worst of cases, and only when authorized by the UNSC. Later on, the author talks about the R2P principle and kind of how, as a sovereign nation, you also have the responsibility to protect your own people in addition to the responsibility to protect others. I think an important thing to think about, especially when you talk about would the Iraq War have been viewed differently if they had found weapons of mass destruction, if they had these different things, a lot of it is politics. So I think that my personal opinion is that yes, if they had found these weapons of mass destructions, then it would probably be viewed very differently and maybe more justified in going in and intervening on that state sovereignty. Something that the author doesn't talk about, but I thought is relevant, is in another class we had talked about the Genocide Convention, which was made after World War II. So after the Holocaust, they made the Genocide Convention, and it officially defined what genocide is, and also all the states that are party to the Genocide Convention committed to act if something qualifies, if something is defined as a genocide. Well, as a result, there have been two things that have been qualified as officially a genocide, which was Rwanda in '94 and also Yugoslavia in the 2000s. But I think an important thing to note there is that a lot of times the international community will be very hesitant to officially classify something as a genocide because it will invoke the Genocide Convention, making it like they're committed to act. So I think in this case there's just a lot of politics, and it's very difficult to say when one would act and when one would not. The U.S. went into Iraq against the United Nations advisement. So in terms of how in the book says it's usually only under dire circumstance and only with their approval, well, not always, because the U.S. did it without it. And also, when will they always act if it's classified as a genocide? Well, not always, because they might really resist classifying and defining it as genocide, because then they're required to act. So there's a lot of gray area here, but I think you brought up a lot of good points, and I hope I answered some of your questions.